Hey there, this is Mr. Icarus, and welcome to yet another edition of Doom Mod Madness. This time round, we're checking out a mod by the name of Project Einherjar. At least I hope that's the correct pronunciation, because that's the one I'm rolling with anyway. But yes, this is a 5-episode, 35-level adventure taking place in the frozen, post-apocalyptic wastes of Midgard, putting you in the shoes of one Winter Agent Juno. Believe it or not, this is also based on a series of books created by the mod author himself, and the more eagle-eyed of you out there may even recognize a little bit of the texture usage here as well, because that same author is also responsible for Strange Eons. In any case, this opening episode has you hot on the trail of Dr. Gall, a maniacal scientist who is doing some very unspeakable things, all in the service of Project Einherjar itself. So what exactly is Project Einherjar? Well, it's not really much of a spoiler to let you know that it's essentially a super soldier project, giving birth to these giant four-armed sons of bitches that you'll be encountering at various points and in various states of deadliness throughout the course of this mod. In the meantime, however, you'll be up against a variety of other enemies, and one thing you may notice is that the majority of enemy forces do seem to be quite lady-centric, apparently a consequence of this post-apocalyptic world, which is pretty interesting. In terms of the weaponry here in Project Einherjar, you'll find that the pistol is actually fairly dependable. Its ammunition comes in decent supply in these early stages, and it boasts a reasonable quick fire rate, a far cry from the vanilla Doom pistol. When it comes to punchier weapons like the assault shotgun here, the ammunition does dry up quite quickly, but it's not really much of a pain to default back to the pistol. And even then, should you somehow run out of pistol ammunition, you can always deliver a swift roundhouse kick to the face, which will down most lower tier enemies in 1 or 2 hits. Putting aside the weaponry for a moment, the encounters here do occasionally suffer from the fact that certain enemy types are hit scan. This is largely confined to enemies wielding pistol, shotgun, or machine gun, and what it really means is if they have direct line of sight, they can pretty much just riddle you with holes. In an attempt to counterbalance this, the game seems to offer you a plentiful supply of healing items. You may notice in the inventory I have what appears to be a mini berserker pack. This will actually grant me 10% health on use, and also I believe give me a small damage buff, but I'm pretty sure that's confined to kicking enemies in the face. When it comes to taking down your first fully armed Einherjar monster, you'll find that the hit scan rules still apply. You're going to have to use those pillars to the fullest, not to mention avoiding the occasional rocket barrage that it'll chuck your way. By this point, you'll probably have already long noticed that the visual design of the enemies as well owes a lot to Wolfenstein, especially the bosses here, which have that signature chunky brick shithouse look to them. Defeating these particular enemies will also be the primary method that you actually obtain the rocket launcher weapon here, which feels pretty nice and organic. It's not just casually left around the levels, just waiting for you to pick them up. In terms of the levels themselves, I was quite pleased to see a fairly decent amount of variety in the environments. I was expecting it to maybe get a little samey after a while, what with the frozen post-apocalyptic theme, but no, you'll be traversing from frozen settlements to industrial sectors, secret labs, castles, sewers, the high seas. It's certainly a mod that tries to vary it up and keep it interesting. Occasionally, however, you will come across a map that does get a little too sprawling and elaborate for its own good. Case in point, this one right here, which had me running around in circles for a good long while, trying to figure out what exactly the switch I just flipped actually did. That said, these maps are most assuredly in the minority. I can only really count 3 off the top of my head that annoyed me to the same degree as this one, and when you consider the total count is 35, that's not bad at all. When it comes to the maps that I really enjoy, however, I seem to have a particular soft spot for maps in motion, and what I mean by that is maps that take place on forms of transport. I'm not entirely sure what it is about them, but I think I appreciate more what can be pulled off within the confines of a particular concept than a big, sprawling, you-can-do-anything environment. As you can imagine, this is a great example of that. I mean, sure, it is a ridiculously wide train, meaning that you can get away with a little bit more level design than usual, but still, you're stuck within the confines of having to go back and forward between the carriages. I particularly like this section because it deals environmental damage if you stand outside of these crates, implying that the coldness of the air whizzing past is what's inflicting that pain on you. Another firm favorite is this particular level in the 5th episode where you board a steamer, and it recalls one of my favorites from Strange Eons where you had to move along the tracks of a giant juggernaut tank to get to the next section of level. And yeah, I'm a sucker for it. I won't deny it, but there's just something pleasing about a really neat concept pulled off well. And much like the train level, it uses the dimensions of the ship itself to its advantage, crafting a nice, tightly built level in the bowels of the ship. This isn't the only time that this mod dabbles in nautical mayhem either. Another level takes place on a generously proportioned tanker, and while it is technically on a form of transport and in motion, I don't find it quite as impressive as these last two. That said, it does feature a pretty cool sinking section. The last few maps of Project Einherjar actually constitute a really cool double whammy, the first of which here taking place in a nuclear missile silo where the last of the old world nukes reside, and fighting through here in the blast pit against this bunch of rampaging Einherjar monsters is just really damn cool in of itself. But what really impressed me was this section a little later on in the level where you're up on the gangways between the missiles and you have to fight a mini-boss between the nuclear missiles themselves. And as this battle actually rolls on, the missiles start to descend, eroding the cover that you've got to stand between you and the boss, which is just really neat use of environment to influence the gameplay. The final level itself returns to the theme of transportation, and what could be possibly better than a level on a boat? Well, a level across multiple boats, of course. This has you hopping between tugs onto a familiar looking steamer here, all in pursuit of a barge up front containing the final nuclear missile. One thing you'll have to take care not to do, however, is fall into the water here, because that's pretty much instant death and back to the start of the level for you. But mercifully, this is a pretty short and sweet level, meaning that you'll not really lose much progress even if you do die. As far as final levels go, however, I'd say this one's pretty damn fun. Another thing worth mentioning here are a few of the items you can use during the course of this mod, such as the missile pod here, which helpfully spews out enemy tracking missiles and pretty much obliterates them, which is nice. There's another much more common item, however, that you'll be able to use fairly frequently during the campaign, and that's the Bouncing Betty. The trick is just making sure your enemies actually walk over it. Pretty effective against groups of low-tier enemies, and can deal a fair chunk against beefier ones, but in that situation I much prefer to use things like the rocket launcher here, or, if available, the Gauss pistol. I know that's not its proper name, it looks like a pistol, it fires Gauss rounds, what are you gonna do? And if I'm gonna be brutally honest, it's a little underwhelming too. Just feels very meh to fire. Same kind of thing goes for the Slot 7 replacement, which is traditionally for the BFG. Here, we get a minigun. Something which you typically see in Slot 4 in many other mods, and granted, it is a pretty powerful weapon to have here, but it's just not setting my world on fire. I feel like I've been spoiled by various other gameplay mods that feature big, beefy, satisfying to fire weapons, and this just pales in comparison. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that the armory here certainly isn't the star of the show. Even without the bombast of big badass weaponry, I still found myself interested enough in this mod for it to carry me through all 5 episodes, and in that regard it must be doing something right. I certainly can't deny that this is a well-made mod, and I'd expect nothing less from the author that brought us Strange Eons. So yeah, I'd say this is definitely worth checking out, especially if you're in the mood for something a little on the chillier side. And hey, if you find yourself interested enough in the world that this takes place in, there's always the book series. In any case, the link, as usual, is in the description below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments, and feel free to suggest any mods you'd like to see me cover in future episodes of Doom Mod Madness. This has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.